Nightfall. Having not yet arrived, it hangs over the lake, ominous as the prophecies of men over guilty consciences. The light, still visible in a blushing strip above the horizon, reflects a scattered image of itself on the surface of that eerie lake. Some of its glowing remnants spread out, barely reaching the shore, where they would suffuse the freshly laid snow. These flakes contain life and memories of past winters, warmer winters, she thought, her figure frozen in reverie. Why are you out here? It's cold, she replies. I like the cold. Not in your nightgown, you shouldn't. The voice, higher in pitch than Eliza was used to hearing from her governess, was too close to be ignored. With a sigh, she gets up from the bench and obliges to follow her back into the mansion. The cold air that made her feel alive is exchanged for the weary warmth of her home, welcomed by the dusty halls which have provided their inhabitants with accustomed but dull pleasantries ever since their dawn. How madly she had longed to plunge her body into that lake, diving within its depths. How strictly she and all others were forbidden to. The legends had it. Many have braved its icy embrace, but none had come out alive. Whether they be true or not, she never knew, for their estate expanded long beyond what eyes could grasp, and no stranger soul was ever to be seen among that realm. These other ones, familiar to the grounds, were seldom to be seen themselves, for after the plague, the few that survived did not dare venture outside their usual surroundings. Fear is the most poisoned elixir for the faint of heart. Let's get you warmed up, says her governess, vanishing up the stairs and leaving Eliza alone in the lounge. She shrugs her shoulders carelessly, before proceeding to throw herself across an armchair dressed in fur hides. It had been moved a long time ago, after the guests had stopped enlivening that chamber. The window before her opened to the same image of the lake, now devoid of the warmth from the setting sun. Nightfall. What other time of day enables one the same clarity of mind needed for contemplating? She asked herself, resting her head on the arm she held below. The soft velvet lining the armchair's wooden frame cradled her thoughts as it always did. I told you 100 times to pull it back where it belongs. Her governess motioned in vain behind her. Whatever. She stuck out her hand lifelessly. It's not like we're having anyone over after dinner to drink gin and play cards. She was right, and she knew it. Since the lockdown, her parents were contained at their cabin in the woods, where they have remained ever since. Authorities have banned long-distance travel altogether, so they were stranded from each other. Something Eliza was used to, from her years spent abroad studying engineering. But this time it was different. Not even phone calls were possible. The power was out. 2 weeks before, a terrible storm had collapsed a tree over the electric wires, and there were no men to spare for a place as remote as theirs. They managed, however, as the gas was still on, and they used it to have gas lamps working on the ground floor, through a constant stream running over copper pipes. Eliza found them in the basement and somehow made the whole thing work out. You can't know that, the governess smirked. We have to get back to normal one of these days. What would your parents make of such behavior? This has been looking pretty normal for a while now. Eliza's remark makes the governess grow impatient. The latter, arms crossed and eyes blazing, subsides in a sigh of resentment. She throws Eliza's change of clothes on the couch and proceeds to the kitchen. Having been left alone in her reflection of the eerie lake, she resumes contemplating a world removed from her over a year ago. The plague had been a terrible tide that swept the nations. Long incubation periods made it undetectable, but contagious. The symptoms were not so bad themselves, though each organism had a different resistance to it. Some just dropped dead, while others suffered for days a high fever to which they finally succumbed. Almost none survived. The pendulum in the hallway echoed 5 of its swings through the chambers, the passing of another hour. Time barely flows there where electricity and society cease to breathe their rapid pulse, she thought, still absently chasing the sun. Not only had it hidden from her view, but a layer of thin fog is sweeping across the lake. Winter seems to approach, robbing her of autumnal bliss. No longer will she wander the shore through the rustle and crunching of the dead coat the trees had discarded. No longer will she emerge with her boots covered in the rusty dust of death, or bring inside a collection of leaves painted by a blaze and glistening, waxy chestnuts. This reminiscent melancholy of hers is gone the next morning, when she takes a steaming cup of tea outside to find all shrubs crisp from frost and under the same spell of the fog. So much for having the sunrise as her companion. There the sun scarcely showed itself during winter days. It still came across the sky, but its light was filtered through the clouds and fog before it even touched the surface of the living. She sighs and takes a careful sip. Before taking another, she is startled by a sudden knock on the window behind her. The governess waves a piece of paper and motions her to come back inside. She would have protested under normal circumstances, but letters were her only contact with a world that forgot. It was one of the few weaknesses she could afford during those times. "Who sent us word?" she asks, eagerly plucking the envelope from between the governess's fingers. "It's the weekly report for the plague," the latter replies. Eliza advances through the hallway, not showing the downturned corners of her lips. Disappointing, she thought, as she wished it had been from either her parents, friends, or even neighbors, if any be alive. She enters her father's study and sits down on the massively carven chair, ignoring the letter opener before her as she rips the seal with her sharp fingernail. "You know I'm interested in it as well, right?" "Then I'll share what it contains," she replies, her thin fingers pulling the folded paper out of its shell. "For the whatever period in November, we have established worldwide, blah, blah, blah. Here we are. Did you notice they stopped reporting on the heel cases? Must have been barely any and decided to save face. Now we got 1,600 sick at the hospital on the opposite shore, and a death toll that rose to 22,859. Yikes. And some village amounted to 30,000 last I could check." Her eyes, averted from the governess, are instead sweeping the desk and her father's belongings. She left everything untouched since they left. There was no way she could believe them dead. No, the location was remote enough. It must be safe. "I wonder how Papa and Mama are holding up at the cabin." A sliver of concern escapes her still. "Better than us. At least they have renewable energy from a system run by nature herself." Yeah, you must be right. The calming argument stuck to her, so she folded the paper back up and placed it in the left cabinet of the desk, atop the other weekly reports. Just as she got up, ready to resume her cup of tea, someone announces their presence at the front door. They had to bypass the electrical doorbell through the reuse of their summer wind chimes. They serve their purpose, as long as you were in a close proximity to them and had your ears attuned for the hollow sounds they chimed. Eliza rushed 2 steps towards it. More she could not. The outstretched arm of the governess was barring her passage into the hallway. "You stay here. We don't know who it is or what they could want from us," she explained. Curiosity always got the best of Eliza, and she knew it. But her life was not something to gamble. So, she nods and follows in the governess's footsteps, close behind at first, but letting the distance between them widen as they came closer to the entrance. The thin aluminum pipes were still clattering impatiently. "Who is it?" the governess asks through the door still closed, before looking through the peephole. "Delegation from the Saragossa estate," a somber voice announced from beyond the threshold. This convinces her to open the door to the two, waiting with their arms crossed behind their backs. "They must be a funerary cavalry," Eliza thought to herself from the shadows of the hallway. The two, for it was impossible to tell whether they are men or women, save from the one who spoke, and he was clearly a man. Their black winter frocks, made of leather and insulated through an inner layer of wool, were as tarnished as their boots. Suppose not many seamstresses and leather workers had survived by now. Besides, work in factories was prohibited a few months into the plague's onset. Their faces, as was mandatory, were hidden behind a full-head mask. These were fashioned from imitation leather, a very cheap and flimsy material, but easy to work with, and spectacles to cover the wearer's eyes. Over the mouth area they had a breathing valve, admitting through an osmotic membrane only the purest air. The disease was airborne, and quick to settle in the mucus or any moist crevice of the face. The shorter of the two brings his hands forward, where they open a plastic pocket before the governess's eyes. Within, there lies a black envelope. It was custom that all letters be sealed in plastic, kept in quarantine for 24 hours, and then be delivered to their destination. Only then were they let out, a measure taken to prevent cross-contamination. Knowing this, the governess reaches in, careful that her fingers only touch the inside of the plastic and the envelope itself. "We extend our condolences," the taller one said formally before they both turned around. Eliza approached the door with hasty steps and shouted after them, "Wait! Can you take a letter back to Emilia? Emilia Saragossa, the younger daughter of theirs." "I'm sorry, miss." The shorter one spoke for the first time in a motherly tone. There were no survivors there. The words shattered all hope. She stood there, one step out the door and resting her weight on the doorframe. The messengers left, her figure slowly fading into the fog. They had no cars for about a month, as the petrol ran out and no new shipments of it were authorized. Few still had horses around, and they were not lending them to public services. Eliza felt a part of her world collapse. From behind, the soft hands of the old governess wrapped around her shoulders. "Come inside, my dear," she insisted. "I'll warm your tea again, and you could listen to some music." The cold, sending a shiver through Eliza's body, pushes her to agree and turn around, pulling the door closed behind her. She and Emilia grew up, her parents' estate ending where this one started. Dwellings being so scarce in that part of town, she had few neighbors and fewer friends growing up. They had received other obituaries in the past. If the family that dies leaves a note, or entrusts someone a list of people to be imparted of their passing, then the state obliges. This method was deemed safer, as the classic daily spread of newspapers had proven an enabler of the contagion. Now they get these letters maybe twice a week, every time having their black envelopes sealed in a plastic pocket. Eliza took her usual spot in the armchair and gazed out the window, waiting for the horrible news to take shape through the air. "It reads here that they are all gone, the entire family. It wasn't Emilia but Laura who got sick first. Then Emilia followed and was the first to die. At least she suffered little. Bless her soul. Anita killed herself before the disease could get to her, having lost both of her daughters over the span of a week. Gibb seems to have suffered for almost a month before he knew his rest, and in that time saw his mother and housekeeper befoil and perish. It seems he left word that we should be announced of this tragedy. Strange. From all the letters we received, the younger seem predisposed to the contagion. I would have assumed they have a stronger immune system." "We do, and it's that which gets to us. The virus makes the immune system attack itself. The stronger it is, the harder it bites back." "The health reports must have been wrong then." "The health reports are always wrong. Let's be honest, no one came willingly close enough to this thing to actually study it, now did they?" The governess sighed and placed the letter back into the dark envelope. Then Eliza unclasped her body from its nook. The gas lamps had a specific, ghastly light that flickered in shades of blue and purple, illuminating the interior in a ghastly matter. Nothing of the former warmth radiating from light bulbs had survived. This new light seemed particularly attracted by the veil of dust, its particles eagerly drinking from its well to overflow. Every piece of furniture was painted as such, in a fine contrast to the many shadows which were left behind by the gas of weakness. She grabbed this envelope, as before, but this time she knew its contents, that were never to be reiterated, so the envelope was instead placed safely in one of her pockets lining a leather belt. For a while, at least, she would want to entertain the illusion of having something left behind by Amelia kept close to her. Later, she would place this under her pillow, where it was to remain ever after. Going up the stairs to the sleeping quarters was a premature ascent into the higher plane of slumber's dreams. Once one had started on this way, the realms blurred their boundaries. Up there, no light could be turned on, a feature reserved under normal circumstances to that space past the hypnagogic state. In dreams, the switches never work. The lights never turn on as they should, as if the brain perceives the physical, constructed world as devoid of the artificial current set loose through its veins. In dreams, the world is forever still, forever dead. The upper floor was plunged into darkness, and still beyond the grasp of pale blue light capable to play with dust. Dead, also, were all the switches of said lights, left without any purpose or meaning. Tonight, this effect was more vivid than ever. She questioned the state of her reality as soon as being halfway up the stairs. The shadows above seemed to shift between objects, to merge with shapes they didn't belong to. They jumped atop the chests and cowered behind the wardrobe. Was this all an illusion? Maybe. After the moment her fingers, clasped around the knob, turned and pulled the door to suffocate all hallway shadows behind its weight, she remembered nothing. Only the last sliver of pale moonlight, cold yet devoid of any bluish tint, setting ablaze the white sheets. They proved thirstier than the dust. The bed might have embraced her with homely softness, or it might have already done so, and she was just remembering the moment now. Regardless, there was no holding back the shadows that engulfed and smothered her into a deep slumber, broken by the first rays of dawn that slipped in between the parted curtains. Her dreamless night succumbed. She was awake, gazing out onto the white surface of the lake. Her contemplation from yesterday had ceased, not by any natural phenomenon, but by a peculiar appearance disturbing its flat mirror. Still too far to be recognized, the unidentified object was pushing its black silhouette against the horizon in a distant view. She raised her head, effortlessly got out of bed, and jumped before the window, squinting her eyes. Nothing. The shape still eluded any recognition, though, amidst waters, could there be any doubt as to its origin? Throwing on a gown in haste, she rushed barefoot downstairs and out the door. Strangely enough, expecting resistance on the governess's part, she encountered none. Maybe it was too early for her to be up. After all, judging by the rising sun, the night had barely ended. The ground had discarded all its freezing malice from the day before. It returned to having its damp autumnal earth mimicking the sensation of moss. Rushing over to the edge of the lake, where a few strands of grass had strayed, her toes were impatiently crunching leaves in expectation. The black ship had gotten much nearer, so that she could, beyond the shadow of a doubt, now trust what her eyes were seeing. A great vessel was floating in a straight line towards the mansion, announced by the ripples it sent throughout the lake. Its slow advance left her time to question its motives and passengers. Could it be aid sent for their survival? Or a cure? An antidote? that would set them free again. Though, more than anything, she was hoping for her parents to have found a way back to her, safely. For, after all, the sea would protect them in its isolation from roads, cities, and all possible outbreak hotspots. Her anticipation grew ever more wild as she could distinguish sails and masts, but no flag. It seemed the warm darkness painted on the wooden carcass had spread through the land upon its arrival. The gusts of warm wind were blowing strands of her wispy hair, brightening the gloomy expression that had started to plague her delicate features since receiving the last notice of death. The lake having no docks, for it had been thought too shallow to accommodate any naval functions, the ship anchored a good distance away. From where she stood, only shadows moved restless on its deck. A rescue boat was dropped in the water, its splash setting the ripples on new heights. 2 figures also descended onto it, and one of them started paddling towards the shore. Now she could see them clearly. The woman with her face turned towards her had such a familiar smile, welcoming her into a realm she thought long forgotten. It was indeed her mother. She bit down her lip for fear of scaring them away if she had given in to the impulse of screaming anything towards them. The boat stopped only a few feet from the shore, and then the other one turned to her. Seeing her father, her eyes became overwhelmed with tears, and not biting down on any impulses anymore, she plunged wholeheartedly into the lake. It being as shallow as expected, she could walk all the way to the boat, her toes sinking into soft mud, seaweed tangling around her ankles and her gown flowing just over the surface, where it spread over the water into a satin layer that contrasted both darkness and warmth. Her father's eyes were staring saddened into hers as he reached out a hand to help her up to them. "I can't believe you made it back to us," she shouted, falling in her mother's arms. "We've been so worried since we got cut off." "We would have never left without you," her father replied, his tone lacking something indiscernible. "Leave?" "Yes, my darling, we have to leave." Her mother was stroking her head in a calming manner, while her father started paddling again back towards the ship. "No!" she protested, throwing her weird gaze from one to the other. "We have to go back inside. Where else would we go? This is our home." For a moment they were both silent. The distance from the shore was growing, and with it she thought it had blurred. Maybe the tears in her eyes were clouding the landscape they were leaving behind. "Stop!" Her protests were holding strong. "Turn around. There's nowhere else to go. What are you talking about? And leaving my governess behind after she took care of me in your absence. How can you?" Still, no answer. Her mother's eyes were lost deep within the lake's waters, while her father was fixed on the ship and getting back to it. Her tears have ceased in favor of an angry flush over the cheeks. No, the tears weren't to blame. As they advanced, the shore and all surrounding landscape was dimming into a layer of damp fog. The closer they got to the ship, the denser the mist got, flowing in layers above the lake, and obscuring everything else to the point where she felt stranded. Nothing in view but their small boat, now bumping against the bellows of the ship. An island of darkness in an ocean of hazy grey that had smothered everything else, even the surface of the lake that, if it was still rippling, it couldn't be discerned anymore. Her rope ladder was dropped down to them, but she hesitated, still pressing her questioning gaze against both her parents. "Let's get back on board and then we'll tell you." Her father was firm in his request. She obliged and climbed the ladder, ending in the rail fencing the deck, which she hopped over. There she saw even more people, just as happy and saddened to see her, most of which seemed oddly familiar. The mother wrapped her arms around her daughter's shoulders and whispered, "Your governess only touched the envelope. On the other hand, you held the letter so close and for so long that it had time to infect you. They hold them now in quarantine to no avail, as a new strain mutated and this one would have to be held in such conditions of isolation for tenfold the time in order for its purging. It was this same variant that got to us about a week ago, but we just couldn't bring ourselves to leave without you. So we wandered the waters until I felt your spirit last night. And so the ship set sail again, braving the mists into most uncharted territories for all